Hello everyone in CSC-120 Computing Fundamentals. This video is to help you get started with Project 10 in Object-Oriented Programming Module 7 of the class. So we have already covered the lecture on objects and object-oriented programming. If you haven't watched the two parts, part 1 and part 2 of the Module 7 lecture on object-oriented programming, please go back and do that before jumping in on this project. So let's get cracking with the project. I won't do the whole project for you, but I will get you started with the project and explain what's expected. So let me switch over and share my desktop. That should have my desktop shared, but let me check just to be sure. Looks like it is. Okay, so you can see Module 7's objectives, and we've talked about all this stuff in the lecture for object-oriented programming. So remember, these linked items are just one page of information, so you've got about 8 pages of material on object-oriented programming here. I just linked them one page at a time. Not sure if that's better or worse than doing it all at once, but at least you know kind of where to go if you want to click into a specific topic. So here's Project 10. Remember, I'm in my development shell, so there's not going to be a date due here because this is a development class. Once we deploy the class, when you're looking at your module assignment summary, these dates will be filled in for you. So the Project 10 instructions are down towards the bottom, so I'm scrolling all the way down to the bottom where it says Module 7 Assignments and Exam. When I click into there, you will see the homework assignment, the project, and when it's available, you'll see the Module 7 exam. So I'm going to click into Project 10, and this project is to get us a working class definition and then create an instance of that class. Remember, an instance of a class is an object, so we'll bring an instance of our pattern for a weather observation object into existence. So the project itself has you set 2 attributes of the weather observation class in order to calculate the dew point. Now, if you're not familiar with what the dew point is, it's a much better measure of how sticky or how muggy the air is as opposed to humidity. So dew point takes into account the temperature as well as the relative humidity, and then whatever number they give you that they say is the dew point is actually a better reading. Now, you could have a dew point in Celsius or you could have a dew point in Fahrenheit. So just keep that in mind as we go through the material. So we said you need 2 things to calculate the dew point. That means that our class definition for a weather observation is going to need 2 attributes, one for the temperature and one for the relative humidity percent. Okay? Now, just as a, in case you're interested, when they quote you the dew point, if it's less than or equal to 55, it's really nice. It's a good day. Okay, when it starts getting above 55, things start getting sticky, and when it's above 65, there's really a lot of water in the air. It's very damp and oppressive. Humid is the word I guess I'm looking for. You can read more if you want to learn more about dew point versus humidity and why the National Weather Service recommends that as a measure. You can do that. So, anyway, here's starting to talk about the requirements for Project 10. And you can see that it spells out here that you're going to create a class definition named weather underscore observation. It's going to have two private properties. Remember, we make something private in Python by prefixing the variable name with two underscores. So you can see the names that are required here for your two private properties. Now, when we say they're private, that means that outside of our class definition, you can't get to these things. So that means if we want to be able to get to retrieve the temperature, then we would have to write an accessor method or a getter method, whatever you want to call it. Remember, there are two names for that, accessor or getter. Okay, so you can see that the project has us creating a get temperature Fahrenheit accessor method. Okay, and it's going to return the value that's set in this private property, temperature Fahrenheit. So you can see that you've got a few accessors and a few mutators. These things that say set are mutators or setter methods. So we're going to have a setter method to set the temperature in Fahrenheit. We're going to have a setter method to set the relative humidity. Okay, and you'll notice that these setter methods are doing some validation. It's not reasonable for us around here anyway to have a temperature of negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And hopefully we'll never see 150 degrees Fahrenheit in North Carolina anyway. I think the all-time temperature is 132 in Death Valley, so we should never have a temperature of 150 in the air. Some validation for the relative humidity. You can't have less than 0% humidity. You can't have a negative relative humidity, and you can't have a relative humidity of over 100%, although some days it may feel like that in the summer around here. You can't have a relative humidity of greater than 100. So you got some validation that you need to do in each of these setter methods. And I talked about how to do validation. You can go back and watch the lecture for object-oriented programming. Part 2, I actually did some validation in a setter method, so you can see how that's done. Okay, so here's once we've created a class definition, it says instantiate a variable named readingObject that is of the weather observation class. So we're going to bring an object into existence from our weather observation class. That object is going to be named readingObject. Okay? And then during the instantiation, we're going to pass two parameters to it. The instantiation will have 70 for the temperature and humidity, temperature in Fahrenheit, and some number, the last two digits of your student ID for the relative humidity. So whatever your student ID is, those last two numbers will be what you use for your relative humidity. Okay? And then it's got us printing the temperature stored in Celsius. If you go up here and look, we've actually got a getter that we create, and I've provided the formula to you to convert the Fahrenheit temperature into Celsius. So you've got to write a getter to get the temperature in Celsius, because remember, it's stored in temperature Fahrenheit, which is a private property. So you're going to print the temperature stored in the reading object in Celsius. You're going to print the temperature stored in the reading object in Fahrenheit. You're going to print the dew point in Fahrenheit. Dew point could be in Celsius or Fahrenheit. Okay, we're going to print it in Fahrenheit. We're going to print a message changing the temperature to 50 degrees, and then we're going to call the object's method to set the private property for the temperature Fahrenheit to that 50 degree number. And then we're going to print the new Fahrenheit temperature, and then we're going to print the Fahrenheit dew point. So what does that look like when it runs? What does that look like when it runs? Well, let's just go run it, because I wrote this, so you can see what it does. So I've got some blank lines here so you can't see the source code for the class definition or anything, but I'm going to run it so you can see what happens when it runs. Okay, there's a temperature in Fahrenheit. There's a temperature in Celsius. Okay, here's the dew point in Fahrenheit. Now, this dew point number that prints right here will be different for yours, because unless your last two digits of your student ID are the same as mine, you will have a different number here. So your dew point in Fahrenheit using your last two digits of your student ID for the relative humidity will give us a different number. This is the line that says changing the temperature to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. There's the new temp, and there's a new printout of the dew point with the 50 degree temperature. Remember, this number will be different based on your last two digits of your student ID. Okay? So that's an example of the project running. Let's create part of this project for you so that you have something that works to get started. It's always good to have a program that works when you're first getting started with a new concept. So let's make our class definition for a weather observation. Okay, remember, we do that with the keyword class, weather observation. Okay, we don't have these, that's only on a function. Okay, this is our class name here. Alright, so we've started our class definition. Everything that's part of that class definition has to be indented. So let's write our constructor. Now, you will need to modify this constructor to add another parameter to our weather observation class when it's instantiated. So I'll point that out to you here in a second. Remember, our constructor looks like this in Python, _, init, _. Then you have the parentheses, like so, and a colon. And then remember, every method of a class has to get self passed to it. Okay? If we want to allow one parameter for the temperature Fahrenheit, remember yours is going to need two, but at least you'll have this constructor done and you will know what you need to do. So temp Fahrenheit. Okay, that's going to be what I call my parameter, and I'm going to default it to 0. If somebody doesn't supply one, it's going to initialize that to 0 automatically. Remember, everything that's part of our method has to be indented. Now, an instance variable for our instance of whatever we bring into existence using this class weather observation. Remember, that instance variable is going to be part of self, because self is the instance of the object. And then double underscore, and I think our instructions said to name this temperature Fahrenheit. Temperature Fahrenheit is the name of our instance variable or property, and we want to set it to this. So I could just copy that and paste it and save myself some typing, huh? Okay, so that is our constructor. What will you need to do? You're going to need to add another parameter right here for the dew point. And you're going to need to set an instance variable to that parameter's value. So I'm leaving some work for you to do, but remember, this program will actually work when we're done with it. So now that we've got a private property named temperature Fahrenheit, we need to write an accessor for that so that somebody outside of our class could actually get to it. So we're going to only allow them to get to this private property through our accessors and our getters. So def, we're going to make another method, and this is going to be get temperature Fahrenheit. Okay, we don't need to have anything going to this except for, remember, every method of our class definition has to get self as the first parameter. Okay, so return self dot double underscore temperature Fahrenheit. That's our accessor method that lets people outside of our class get to the temperature in Fahrenheit that's stored in our private property named double underscore temperature Fahrenheit. Okay, so we've written an accessor. Now let's write a setter for this. Set temperature Fahrenheit. Now this is going to need more than just self passed to it, because if we're going to set that, we need a parameter, and actually it'll be pretty much what we had up here on our constructor right there. If I come down here and paste that in, let me get my mouse positioned right here. Okay, so the first thing comes from Python automatically. Remember, when we're outside of our class, we don't supply self. It's only when we're writing our class definition. This is a parameter. Whatever they put inside the parentheses when they call set temperature Fahrenheit is what is going to be plugged into this parameter. Okay, and then we need to set our self dot double underscore temperature Fahrenheit equal to temp Fahrenheit. Okay? Now remember, when you're doing this, before you did this line right here, you would need to do some validation. And the validation is going to be to prevent setting of the temp if temperature Fahrenheit is, if it's less than let's just say if it's less than 50 minus 50, or it's greater than 150, then we're going to just return out of the function. Otherwise we're going to do this. So I just put some notes in there so you could see what's happening. Okay. So, all right. So we've got our getter or our accessor. We've got our setter or our mutator. Two names for that. Okay. So we've pretty much got a complete class definition now. There will be more methods for you to add. So remember, you've got more stuff. You're going to add those methods, and then this is going to be any code outdented after this is not part of our class definition. Remember, Python lives off of indentation, so what tells Python that we're inside our class is the fact that we're indented. Once you outdent, you're no longer in the class anymore. So let's write some code to actually bring this object into existence. Remember, our object name is supposed to be readingObject. So let's conjure one up from the DNA of a weather observation. Okay, let's bring one into existence. readingObject is the name of the object variable that we're going to bring into referencing our weather observation object. So remember, this is the name of the class. This is the DNA that we're going to use to make a readingObject. Okay, so it equals a weather observation. Okay, remember that our constructor right now requires the temperature in Fahrenheit. If you don't supply it, it'll automatically put a 0 in there. Okay, so let me clear out this so I don't have anything showing down there. Okay, so we wanted to set it to 70. Okay, so that's all it takes to instantiate our object. Okay, now that we've got this object in existence, this readingObject in existence, let's use our let's test out our accessor method. Print temp is, the temp Fahrenheit is, let's just go ahead and make it capital. Temperature Fahrenheit is, okay, how do we get to that? readingObject dot, what was the name of our accessor? Get temperature Fahrenheit. get temperature Fahrenheit. Remember, when we want to run a method, we have to put the 2 parentheses on the end of the method name to run it. Okay, and remember, we need another parenthesis for the end of our print statement. So let's try this out and see what happens. Let's see what happens. Let's see if this works. Okay, File, Save As. I've got a folder that I've created. I always tell folks in the getting started part of the project to create a folder. This case, we're working on Project 10, so I've got a Project 10 folder here, and I'm going to name this dewpoint dash dewpoint dash Clifton is my last name. Okay, so I've got that saved in my Project 10 folder. Let's run it. And it says that my class name is messed up. So I left out a colon right there. There we go. You get to see me debug a little bit, huh? Left out the colon right there, so I fixed that now. And there it is working. Temperature Fahrenheit is 70. That's what came back from our Accessor method. So now let's go ahead and follow the instructions in the project. The next thing it says to do is to print the message that changing the temperature to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? So we're just printing that message to let the person that's running our program know what's happening. And then let's call that method to change it. How would we call this method to set the temperature Fahrenheit? Well, we need our object, right? readingObject dot set. Remember, this is our dot operator here to dereference our readingObject. Okay, set temperature Fahrenheit. We're going to set it to 50. Okay, so we did that. Now let's test it out again. We can actually do that. Let's see. Actually, I want to put these lines right here. I got below there somehow. Okay, moving these lines around a little bit. So here we're printing the original temp. Okay, now I'll add a line to print the new temp. readingObject dot get temperature Fahrenheit. So remember our 2 parentheses to call that method of our readingObject. So let's run it again. You can see right here, there's original temperature that came from this line when we created our object, instantiated our object. Here's where we printed out the 70 degrees right here. Temp Fahrenheit is 70. Okay. And then we printed a line that said changing the temperature to 50 degrees. There's that line. And then we printed the new temperature. So you can see that you've got some stuff to do here. You've got to add some validation. Go back and look at the lecture part 2 for Module 7, and you'll see how I did some validation on that in that video. You'll need to add some validation to this method right here, to this setter. You're going to need to develop quite a few more methods there that, remember, those methods need to do are all list, or the things that those methods need to do are listed right here. So the formula for this algorithm is to calculate the temperature in Celsius. The formula is whatever the temp is in Fahrenheit minus 32 times 5 divided by 9. Remember, this X is not valid Python code. And remember this, where it says Fahrenheit, that's going to need to come from your private variable in your object, or in your class. So you're going to need to write this method. Okay? You're going to need to write this method. And again, the algorithm to do that is you're going to, this particular getter is going to call this getter. So you can't write this one until you've got this one working. So you're going to have to kind of go down the list here. But you're going to have to get the temperature in Celsius, because to get the dew point in Celsius requires you to convert that private variable that's stored in a double underscore temp Fahrenheit or temperature Fahrenheit. You're going to have to convert that into Celsius. Okay, so this is the formula to do the dew point in Celsius. Okay, once you've got the dew point in Celsius, this is the formula or the algorithm to get the dew point in Fahrenheit. First, you got to get the dew point in Celsius. Then you've got to take whatever that dew point is in Celsius and multiply it times 9 divided by 5, and then add 32 to it. So you've got the formula here, but remember, this is going to be a call to self dot get dew point Celsius. Okay, so you're going to have to call that method. Remember, and actually to get this to run, you have to have the 2 parentheses on the end of it. Okay, so you're going to have to write that method to get the dew point in Fahrenheit, and then you're going to need to create an accessor here, a setter, a mutator method. You're going to need to create a mutator method to set the relative humidity. Okay, and again, when you run this thing, this is what you'll get out, with some exceptions. Remember, temperature Fahrenheit would always be 70, because that's what we're calling when we create that object. That's always going to be 21.1 if your formula is working right. Okay, the dew point in Fahrenheit is going to be different based on the relative humidity that you're going to be adding to your call here when you create that object. Let me go back to the starter file here. You're going to have something with the 2 digits right here, You're going to have something, the 2 digits from the last 2 of your student ID right there. And remember, you're going to have to modify this constructor to accept 2 parameters instead of 1. So you got some work to do there. You've got a functioning program. You just need to add stuff to it. Right here's what our program's doing so far. Okay, so this is our sample or starter file. I did about 30% of the project for you. You've got the other stuff to do to make it function the way it's supposed to. Remember, your numbers are going to be a little different for the dew point in Fahrenheit based on your student ID. Okay? So you should be in pretty good shape. I've given you what I just did in this video. I've given you that file where you can download it and use it as a starting point for your project. So download this starter file and then go in and start making the changes. And the changes are listed here in the stepwise refinement. It says implement the project as in the getting started. Remember, that's naming that project file. This starter file right here is going to be dewpoint dash whatever your last name is. Okay, so once you've done that, you'll need to add some comments to the program. Then I think you need to add comments anyway. They're right here. And then modify the dewpoint dash your last name so that all the setter and getter methods are done. Those are talked about. What they need to do are talked about right here. Those methods. Okay. Once you've got all those done, then there's the instructions for what it needs to print, or you can watch the video again and see what it needs to print. So remember that you've got to modify the constructor so that it accepts a second parameter named REL humidity. You've got to, in that constructor, you've got to create a private property named _relative humidity. In that constructor, you've got to assign the value of the parameter REL_humidity to our private property. So I recommend you test this stuff a little bit as you go. So that's your video to get started with Project 10, and we'll be looking to see what you come up with. Good luck.